It was interesting listening to Andrew. I had a similar moment, I guess, with regards to street art. I'm originally from Bristol in the UK, and on a visit back there with my daughters, we saw two exhibitions, the remains of two exhibitions, which was See No Evil and another urban art festival that they'd had there. And when we were walking along, one of my daughters said to me, what a fantastic thing. Wouldn't it be great if we could have something like this in Perth? And unfortunately, like most people, my normal reaction would have been, that's not going to happen. That won't happen in Perth. Those sorts of things aren't there. And the more I thought about it, and the more I realized, how much these things transformed the landscape. I thought, what a great thing to try and have back in Perth. And fortunately, through some philanthropic contacts, I ended up being introduced with the magnificent organisation that is Form. And originally went to speak with Linda and Rebecca about the idea of maybe having a street art festival here in this city. And look, they were the right people to talk to, and as that has proved. And last year, in our first iteration, really, we had no idea how popular this was going to become. I just wanted to share this passion. I mean, like Andrew, I've become a collector as well. I mean, one thing that I'm sure Andrew will agree with me with as well is that it's a very, very addictive behaviour. I found myself a bit like my sister-in-law who used to hide handbags in the garage. I found myself sort of secreting works of art home without telling my wife, and I find myself bidding for all sorts of stuff, and gradually becoming immersed in the world. And being incredibly fortunate to meet with some of the artists themselves, and it's just so invigorating being around such creative people. And so this year, we've managed to ramp things up incredibly well. I think, Form as an organisation has been fantastic, and Linda is quite incredible, as I'm sure you're all aware. And we've stepped things up. This is a huge step up for us. And I think we've helped to put Perth on the urban art map. I was talking to Luke Cornish last night, and he published his picture on Facebook of the image of a hunter that he painted at Central TAFE. And he told me that within 24 hours, over 200,000 people had seen that image. Now, I know when I was in Bristol, the city paid for, not Upfest, but for See No Evil. And they estimated that the return to the city was sixfold on the money that had been spent. And I think that's the sort of thing we can see happening here. We're very fortunate that we've had some of the best artists in the world, and we're blessed to have such great works of art to look at. So thank you very much, and I'll go and join the conversation.
With artist statements, and if I can just go back a notch, 2 years ago I was at the Venice Biennale, and I went to a very curious exhibition, and part of the exhibition there was a small shelf, and on the shelf was a glass of water, and I thought, what's the big deal about that? There was just the shelf about at eye level and a glass of water. And it was only until I read the artist's statement and I realised that no, it wasn't a glass of water. In actual fact, it was a tree, that it sort of all made sense, sort of. In the same exhibition, there was a bottle with a airproof top on it. It's just a small bottle that you might have perfume in. And it was labelled Parisian Air. So the bottle was closed in Paris, and that was a work of art. And it was only until I did read the artist's statement, and I still can't work out what the guy was on about, that I thought, well, okay, it made me think. Another one I've seen, it reminds me of my garage. I'm a hoarder, and there was in a very, very flashy gallery a bundle of newspapers, maybe about this high, tied up with twine, and that was just sitting in the middle of the floor. And without an explanation, what the hell does it mean? Another about 6 or 8 years ago, the Romanian pavilion at the Venice Biennale. I walked in the door, and it's about 3 stories, 2.5 or 3 stories high, a rectangular building, a bit smaller than a basketball court. And I walk in there, and there's nothing there. There's just totally nothing. Nothing on the wall, nothing on the floor, nothing on the ceiling. And I'm thinking, obviously their exhibition was in a truck and there was a rollover and it caught on fire and they just don't have anything there. But no, when I went to the artist's intention, the description of what the art was, it was in actual fact, you had to think and you have to go back and try and conjure up the memories of the previous exhibitions, which I think they were sort of taking Yves Klein's Thunder from 1956, where he invited people along to a gallery. He completely cleared it out of art, and he just wanted people to come along and experience what it was like with no art. So I guess that's a long way of saying, how do you guys go about your artist's statements? How important are they?
It's really tough, and it's I think I know exactly what you're saying. Is there's the distinction between plain speaking and then the voice of the academy and how you're meant to frame the work, and I think
we call it the bullshit line.
Right, right, exactly. And I think there's, and you're absolutely right. There is the risk of taking yourself way too seriously and your work way too seriously. And sometimes the best sentence about your work is the simplest, most direct way. I mean, I think you read the statement from my website that said, what was it? Disenfranchisement with the built environment, and what on earth does that mean? And
yeah.
I think it's...
Can you explain it?
Yeah, well, I can, but it's obviously condensing someone's work into one paragraph is terribly difficult and nerve-wracking, and yeah, it's a tough thing as an artist, I think.
Stormy, what about you?
Well, it's how do you condense your life into a paragraph, really?
That's a good answer.
I think it would probably be easier to write what they put on your headstone than what you did in your life. So having said that, I had someone write it for me. No, yeah, I guess it's like your philosophy, who you are, everything you've done, and I guess, yeah, if you think it's easy, then go home and write one. If you think it's difficult, then you've probably already written one. So yeah, that doesn't really answer your question, though, does it?
No, you've given us an answer. Just as an aside, I really like Spike Milligan's epitaph.
Love it.
Yeah. For those who don't know, it was I told you I was sick.
It's interesting. He was also one of his requests was that he be buried in a washing machine, but they didn't allow that.
Nandita?
I find it very hard because I keep changing. I keep exploring new things. Though the basic idea remains the same, but yes, it's like the visual difference and trying to just tap the whole thing and the growth pattern. Yeah, I have always struggled with that one. But simple and easy is the best.
Yes.
I think
I'm saying that.
Oh, sorry. I just think the other thing is that you're talking about visual art, and it shouldn't really translate into language, is that ambiguity. The reason it exists is the ambiguity between language. And so you shouldn't...
That's very true.
So trying to condense it into the form that it's not intended for is also... I mean, I think the really great art that I love is it has that intangible thing and that sort of a poetic nature that hits me on a guttural level, and then having to translate into language is an imperfect thing as well.
I don't know about you, Andrew, but I've got to say I generally don't read those things anyway. You know, when I look at a work, it hits you on a very visceral level, and you sometimes don't need to know what it's about. You know, it impacts you on an emotional level, and I think that's where it drives it. I mean, Flem, who painted a couple of works for us recently, including those wonderful silos, he doesn't like to talk at all about his work because he says he's heard himself a couple of times, but he thinks it makes him sound like an idiot. so he prefers to stay relatively anonymous, and but it doesn't affect the impact of his work.
It's like reading the foreword, but so you don't have to read the book.
There's obviously a common thread of community through your practices. And do you see where do you compare and contrast what your practice is with Stormy's and Nandita's? Do you see similarities there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Stormy's work in particular is very humanist and direct, and I think very honest. And also as a side, Stormy was someone who did aerosol workshops with me when I was in high school, and helped me get along spraying and get into creating art in the first place as well. Which I think really is an aside. But yeah, I mean, I think particularly Stormy's work is very, very humanist and very direct, and very much a reaction to I guess his own experiences and the communities he lives in. And I think that's that great thing about street art making work directly on walls in cities, is you kind of that an individual stood there against that wall and made that work, and it makes the city feel more human, to understand that it's not just a cold piece of concrete that's been erected. It makes it more humanist. And Nandita's work, obviously, with the community interaction and and that kind of loop back that the community then feeds into the work, which feeds back into the community, which feeds into the work.
So where would you see the connection with, say, a city like Perth, where obviously I'm very keen, as you might have gathered, on encouraging the spread of street art through this fantastic city, just to enliven it even more. But often there comes the distinction and the issues that you've got with graffiti, which people look at graffiti, and which to my mind is often illegal, and then you've got street art, which is usually legal. But how you get people across the line of, well, stuff happens and you've just got to take the good with the bad. Personally, I love graffiti.
It's only illegal if you get caught.
Yeah.
But places like Fremantle have done amazing things where they've decided that if there's a work there and they deem it a piece of art, then it will be left alone. So they're not going to paint over it, which I think is fantastic.
Well, that's very enlightened.
And that's
fantastic.
The council came up with that idea. I remember meeting the guy that had written the policy, and it's obviously I think a pretty clever bloke. What happens if you get in the caught in the process of it, and then they deem it art and therefore they keep it afterwards? I don't know, but
Paul, what's your view on that?
Well, I think one of the interesting things was when we first looked at doing public, the idea, one of our concerns was that perception of strét art as being just an extension of graffiti, being the illegal work. And I actually, before we started, I went to speak to the guys at Upfest in Bristol, which is like a community-based urban art project. It's all done in sort of one small area, like having about 50 or 60 artists just in Vic Park. And their advice to us was really to keep away from the script writers, the people that are actually writing words and letters and that stylized type there, certainly for the first years, until people became more accustomed to street art and became more aware of it. One thing I will say was that, I guess last year one of the things that surprised us was the lack of negativity around the whole project. We expected, to perhaps have a bit more pushback from the community than we did, but I was quite amazed to be out there one day watching Alexis Diaz paint his wall in Wolf Lane, which is outstanding. In fairness, you could have stood there any day for about 30 because he took a while. But
Yeah, he's very slow.
but
He likes to chat.
He does. He does. He likes to go up and down that boom. But it was interesting to be stood there and to see two 70-year-old ladies come down the road to view the work. And I thought, oh, they'd got lost, or that they just happened to be sort of wandering through. And I wrongly as it turned out, assumed when we started that our target market was probably going to be 15 to 45. I think you and I are probably a little bit old to be in this field, but actually that proved totally incorrect. These two 70-year-old ladies have come out specifically to see the art being painted. And that was quite incredible. I mean, yes, you get a few comments, and I know when the Street Art Festival in Adelaide was launched recently, I had a small involvement with that, and spoke with a couple of developers over there trying to look for walls for some of the guys when they were setting that up. And one of the guys was just, no, not having a bar of it at all, without thinking. I mean, I'm a developer as well. It's like, and in a community like that, to add some vitality and vibrancy to an area which, could do with it, quite frankly, I just thought it was a very foolish attitude. But I think I agree with you. I think overall you take the good with the bad, and I think most of these guys, if you look at their works, they all had to start somewhere. And I'm sure even as fantastic as their work is now, the first things they did probably weren't that great. It's like, and by using the street as their canvas initially, it then gives them the opportunity to move on and create the things that they do later on. I mean, one of the things I'm really interested is how painting on the street actually shaped your careers. For all of you guys, I mean, all of you have had experience of being on the street, moved on to other things. I mean, obviously you still do paint on the street, but how much of a plus has it been having the street as a backdrop?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I can't speak for everybody else, but for me, it's like critical. Like I said when I was talking, like I was always drawing, and I was always on paper. But it wasn't until I actually took a spray can and painted something big on a wall that I actually had a real sense of purpose. And I didn't think I set out to do it illegally. It's just, there's a wall over there, I'm going to go paint it. And when I was, 1984 in Perth, you could do that. There wasn't this thing about it being illegal or legal or whether you had permission. I remember painting a house in Burragoon in like 1985, and it was the back wall of a house that faced an empty lot. And the guy came out and looked around and was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm painting." Like 3 p.m, I finished school and was painting on his wall. He was like, "Oh, okay." And we went inside. So to me, it was like, I wasn't breaking any laws. I mean, it's only a coat of paint anyway, really, isn't it? It's not, you're not killing somebody. But then the other stuff of like, there was certainly the excitement of going out at night and jumping fences and running tracks and stuff that was exciting as a kid, and maybe that's part of that rites of passage for a lot of young men. Yeah. Worst case scenario, it gets painted over. So what?
I guess it's sort of integral for me. I mean, it's where it kind of started, and I think it was interesting that Stormy says, it's just a coat of paint, and I think that's what's really powerful about it is the fact that you can aesthetically damage something or aesthetically destroy something, but really actually you can paint over it in a second, but it has this real direct impact on people. I think that's a really exciting thing with such a simple act, and I think that is what got me into the scene and the movement in the first place, and then transitioning. I was sort of saying before, like, I didn't grow up in these urban centres, I grew up in a suburban world, so a lot of this journey began by saying, well, I should start reflecting on the places I came from and painting the environment that's familiar to me. I think there's a large part of sort of the next generation along from Stormy, where documentation became a really important thing, and as particularly distributing stuff in magazines and online, the photo became very important, and that for me, and obviously things get painted over, the documentation became this important thing, and my background in film and started incorporating that and creating this really high level of documentation, and then can you create documentation of his work that becomes emotive and contributes to the work. And I guess that all sort of came from the fact that, you know, I'd have to go out and take photos of this work or it would just disappear.
I think for me, I'm just a conversation generator. So I just like standing next to my work and just having as many people talk to me. And I think and it's basically more emotional. I like targeting the emotions more. Whether it was the letter writing project, I had like younger kids come up and draw whatever they felt like, to a small kids, you know, who just didn't know how to write, got his mother to write a letter, and then he mimicked the whole handwriting, to older women coming in and bursting out in tears and writing to their lost mothers. It generated conversation, generated emotions, and just the whole process of it. I mean, I feel like every time I engage in different ways, even whether it's the sound bottles, I had like kids jumping up to the bottle, or like, you know, sort of like initially in the first stages, my tests, I didn't put loud enough speakers, so all the parents were picking up their kids right next to the bottle. And, you know, I just felt like, you know, every time there has been some sort of reaction, whether I painted with wires and they said, oh, doesn't this work? It has led to me making electronics, to, you know, me exploring different ways. That direct feedback, that emotion is what I live off and respond to, and I feel it makes my art way richer. In that spontaneity. And I like keeping that emotive spontaneity very direct.
Yes, that's very obvious. I must admit I was really struck by what you were saying, and the community engagement you had, and, you know, with the slum kids and then the village kids. Street art is a very male-dominated area, and there's relatively, or by definition, there's relatively few females involved in it. But you remind me very much of my friend Swoon, and also Caffeine. Mm-hmm. They are both, Swoon has got a number of community-based projects of linking art with the community and trying to, there's one that I visited in Pittsburgh, where she's raised money to buy an old church, and the church is going to be converted into a factory of making tiles, decorative tiles. So there's giving employment to this really economically disadvantaged community. And when there was the earthquake in Haiti, she got a team together and they went over there and they built these very simple houses, but which were decorated by visiting artists, including Swoon, of course. And then Caffeine, a Melbourne artist, she's just recently got back from Manila, where she's been working with slum kids in these rubbish dumps, where they burn wood to make charcoal, which they then sell. And so she's gone in there and using the same charcoal, she's taken in paper, and she's teaching the kids and getting them involved in art to try and lift them out of this really terrible situation. So if you don't mind, I'd really like to introduce you to those, my two friends. Mm-hmm. And I think there's, talking about getting people together, that's one of the things Sandra and I like to do, is sort of get people together, and I think that you'd make an awesome triumvirate.
Thank you.
Paul, have you got...
I think, I mean, one of the things that I love about street art is the fact, you know, it's in many ways the democratization of art. You know, the fact that, you know, people get to see it. I just think that, you know, you look at so many of the buildings that have been painted during this year and last year, and I don't think many people could argue that it looked worse than when we started. You know,
yes,
it's like,
exactly.
I mean, it's enhanced the city. For me living in Bristol, you know, when I used to go back, and having seen how the art impacted there, I think it has a softening feel for the city. It gives us a sense of a sense of belonging, and a sense of space that is much more real than a relationship to the concrete objects that are there as well. I mean, I like the fact that lots of people get to see these things all the time. I mean, more people will drive past most of these artworks or walk past these artworks than would go to visit a gallery. I like it from that point of view. And one of the things that we were particularly keen on, and I think has actually been a very fortunate spin-off from last year's public, was when we launched it. The street art community here, who have been fantastic and engaged with this. We wondered whether there may be some kind of pushback from them, bringing in people from outside and giving them good walls and things like that. But quite the opposite's happened. It's just been fully embraced, and we hope that it would be a bit of a game changer and get people to up their game. The people that were painting here, and also introduce other kids, to the craft and give them a sense of purpose. And I mean, the fact that at the moment we've got the Salon show over in Victoria Park, with works from 100 different West Australian artists, shows that's already started to happen. So I think that's a major achievement. It's happened along the way.
Oh, the creative talent in Perth is just amazing. I just can't wait to get out and go around.
I think I was going to make a point before we were talking about development and how street art's perceived as well. Is I think there's this old idea of the broken window theory that says that's been justified for for getting rid of graffiti out of cities for a long period of time. And I think particularly in the last 6 years, what I've seen is when you start seeing street art popping up, you suddenly think, oh wait, this is an area that's now on the rise. And you think, oh okay, where's the next cafe where I can sit on a crate and have a latte? You know what I mean? That sort of, you expect like, oh, and there's going to be artist loss here, and it's almost the beginning of gentrification. I think in New York, Tony Goldman of the Goldman Property Group really used this, and in the Miami district, in Wynwood, of really using street artists to raise the value of an area and create a level of grassroots community involvement. I think there's a really interesting intersection now where it's beneficial to have it in these neighbourhoods, and it attracts people to those areas as well. I mean, I think the most heavily graffitied and street art areas in Melbourne are the places that everyone wants to live. Yeah.
And Stormy, your characters, is it right to call them characters?
Yeah.
So do they have names?
I don't know if there's a right or a wrong. No, they don't have names, unless people want to name them, I guess. My idea of painting is that I'll paint something and then it belongs to the people that live or work or exist in that area. They become the custodians. They will make up the stories. They'll tell those stories to other people. In the process of telling that story, two people have communicated how they feel about certain things, and they're no longer strangers anymore. And that's the process. For me, that's a successful painting. So, if they want to call them George, call them George. But if you have a story and you tell that story, you tell what you think about things, or how you see what you're saying is, this is how I see the world, in much the same way I think as we do when we paint. Certainly you did when you got people to come in and create works. Those are, that's a pretty powerful thing.
Stories are the way from history, information is being passed along and retained. It's one of the most elusive ways. I don't know, I just find them like mythologies or iconographies in India to everyday storytelling. People remember the stories more than facts.
And where do you see your work going?
I'm a situationist, that's how I see myself. I create events and I look at reactions and I create them into beautiful things. And those reactions, those letters became datas for the machine. It's a process that became into something, and I created it into music. To whether it was basic conversations in the community talking about domestic violence, giving people a safe place to express. Creating networks through that, kinships, bondings. I had, as a child, pretty troubled, and so art was a way of, I think I was really able to express and work things out. And I see, like, in the same way, it can be used with other people in different ways to communicate, or not even communicate, just give them the freedom to express. I think everyone has their own story, which is waiting to pour out. I just have to give them the platform or the confidence that, hey, just go ahead and play.
It's fantastic. And where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
I think this is kind of, this project has sort of taken over my life, and it's something that I'm going to keep working on. Got a project going back to Ohio through the Rust Belt this year. And I guess continue. I mean, each project kind of leads to the next project and the logic of the next project. I definitely see myself bringing my painting back into my practice, and I guess everything kind of logically follows on from the next project, but how that works and that process of how that happens, I'm not really sure. But I always know that I'm going to be busy.
Yes, you seem to be. Oh, stop. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting conversation. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see you there. So I think, I'm not 100% sure what happens now or where we're going, but I think there's somewhere we have tea and coffee, or...
Can I just say, I'd just like to say something before we go. I'd like to thank everybody, for this fantastic symposium. It's been an incredible week. I feel a little bit like when I was a 16-year-old with a moped, and we used to go to the cinema to see motorcycle movies. We'd all come out afterwards, and we'd be going about 5 times as fast as when we arrived. So I hope that we've started a conversation here, and let's hope that continues. And if there's anybody out there that's got a large wall that they'd like painted, that's in a good spot, or would like to help sponsor us for next year, I'd be very happy to talk to you. Thank you.
And just thank you all just for the time and the effort and the fabulous presentations. It's just really quite inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And a big thank you too to Andrew for coming over to moderate that session. But those presentations this morning were mind-blowing, I'm sure you'll agree. Fabulous artists. We're blessed to have them all here together in one room from all corners of the world. So thank you again. Now, thank you for your patience in pushing through morning tea. We will finish early to allow you to have the chance to have some refreshments and also to mingle with the artists, which was the whole reason of actually deciding to push through that break. We've just got a little bit more to wrap up with, and before we reach the end of the 2.5 days of public symposium, I'm going to task Charles Landry again with the challenging job of reflecting on 3 days' worth of big ideas, common threads, aha concepts, and the takeaways that have started to emerge from what has been a very dense but very inspiring discussion. Thank you, Charles.
One of the themes we had yesterday was uncertainty and unpredictability, and this is an example of it because I thought I was going to spend half an hour thinking about it, and in fact I'm not going to spend half an hour thinking about it because I've got to now say whatever I'm going to say. But how many people were not here yesterday? Right, okay, so I'll just do a summary of a summary of a summary of the things we talked about yesterday. Essentially, I think what emerged as a theme when you were able to just sort of take a sort of helicopter view of everything that was said, and there are a variety of people, as you well know, who were showing experiences from completely different directions. Some people had triggered Restaurant Day in Helsinki that caused a type of tipping point in the city that changed the way the bureaucracy worked, as an example. Enrica in the morning was talking really about the car versus people thing, people walking around, you know, saying walking is the key mode of transport, and that sometimes one of the key phrases he used, which was quite interesting, that the abnormal, sometimes you just don't see it's abnormal and it feels normal until you challenge it and you suddenly say, why the hell did we do that all our lives. So just to take the point about pedestrians, as we well know, the space for cars is 90%, but the pedestrians do actually 90% of the movement in cities. So there's a complete imbalance there. So that was another extreme in terms of who was presenting yesterday and the day before. Irma Raineri talking about the Creative Bureaucracy project, which is something I'm involved with her in South Australia, which is trying to completely rethink how bureaucratic systems work. And when you take all of that together, all of the things that were said and the conversations we had privately, you could quite clearly see that there is a new world emerging, if you could put it together and put all the pieces and see it afresh. And what was really interesting from the conversation here, and I think this event was exceptional because, as you can imagine, I'm in these types of events all the time, and this one is special, is that really what we're all about is trying to create the conditions and the devices and the mechanisms and the platforms and the rules and the incentives for people to think, plan and act with the imagination that they have and unleash the potential that obviously many people have, that is usually suppressed and not expressed and so on. And you could really feel in the stories people were telling the sense of urgency they had in wanting to bring that out in some sort of way. And one of the things that I just think came up in the conversations with the artists here is that deep yearning for the urban conversation. And I think that's really quite visceral. And I've noticed that over the last decade, and it's partly to do with the things that were said about fragmentation and nomadism, or no-landism, or nomad land, etc., nowhere land. And how we're trying to balance, in a sense, being a moving type of species with it being a sedentary species at the same time. And that's where place comes in, and how place then acts as an anchor. And so if you just think of an analogy, it's a reed rather than a rod. The beautiful thing about a reed in the water is it's fixed, but it moves sort of like this with the wind, but it still has some sense of anchorage. And that's why I emphasized yesterday this point at the end, that it seems to me that there was this new world emerging, but there were sort of 5 steps. And one of the main emphases was the point about the familiar, and when you brought up your home and things like that, the familiar, that we know, the tradition, the memory, all of those things that on its own can seem a bit claustrophobic. But when linked then to the second point, which is the one about option, possibility, choice, can do, movement, begins to get some energy, linked then to the third point, which I mentioned, which was about connection, both internally, connecting with yourself, connecting with the people around you, connecting with your neighborhood, connecting with your city, connecting with the wider world. And then using those 3 things to, in a sense, enrich oneself, and that's what I meant when I was talking about the city being a canvas as a learning experience. And it was quite interesting the way you were talking about urban arts just now as a democratic process and those questions you were just asking a minute ago. And finally, the need that the city must provide for inspiration in general. And Hester yesterday showed a wonderful example, I don't know if who was there, but of this church that was being taken apart in Chicago, and brick by brick it was being taken apart. And one of the things, which is another theme of this event, was the way that what you're all doing and we're all doing is ideas are migrating, yes, but materials were migrating. So how do you take those bricks and stones and stuff from that church, which happened to be a Catholic church, Irish, you can get the drift of that, which was just being slowly eviscerated, and taking those same materials and building something else that still could, in some way, in a new form, relevant for today and tomorrow, keep that sense of sacredness, which, you know, whatever inspires obviously changes through time, I thought was quite powerful and interesting. So the question really to Perth, because some of you may know that I was the person who said Perth is the city that says no, and I was asked when I arrived, and I said, oh, there does seem to be a bit of yes, and obviously we know the atmosphere's changed and so on. But in the sense of where next, there is really something to be said to Perth. Now, I've been holding this back, but I am going to be a bit irritating, because I know that there are not enough people from the public administration here. They haven't been here. Some of them were forbidden to come. Others from the national government, not national, what's it called, state government, didn't feel this was professional development. And the reason they didn't feel it was professional development is because they don't bloody understand, because they don't see the connections, because they don't go to these events, so they don't understand the way the world's working, which means that they are missing opportunities. And because they're missing opportunities, they're not reaching their potential. And when you look at the way cities work, and if you again take this helicopter view, the process, the big processes that have occurred are really threefold, and I mentioned it in my own talk, which is initially 20, 30 years ago, people understood that the city of culture, which is really the fight for distinctiveness and who you are and what is interesting about you, was followed by that sense of harnessing the collective imagination. So the strategies don't say these words, but they say the version of them. And the next phase is all about creating opportunities. And I hope somehow that whatever has been said over the last 3 days is transmitted to those people who weren't here, and that they can do something with the lessons that were here. And I know that Form will publish it and produce it in some ways that makes that in principle possible. So I just hope they understand what was going on here. Thank you very much.